Dobro jutro, ovo je Teologija uz jutarnju kafu, moje ime je Beređi Dušan Bera, autor i voditelj ove emisije. Dobrodošli u Teologiju uz jutarnju kafu, jako mi je drago da mogu biti ponovo sa vama i da možemo danas da snimamo jednu emisiju ponovo. Danas ponovo pričamo o roditeljstvu, a želeo sam malo da obradim teologiju o roditeljstvu u ovoj seriji i malo neke praktične stvari vezane za roditeljstvo i mislim da u ovoj emisiji će biti puno toga praktičnog što možete naučiti. I uvek kad razmišljate o roditeljstvu, razmišljate uopšte o komunikaciji, jer komunikacija jeste osnova svega toga, pa i ako nemate dece, uvek vam je potrebno da budete bolji u komunikaciji. Pa eto, danas se skuli kafu, vodu, šta god već pijete, počinje teologija uz jutarnju kafu. Teologija uz jutarnju kafu je emisija koja ima za cilj da približi različite teme iz duhovnosti, neko svakodnevnom kontekstu, ali da promišlja neke svakodnevne teme kroz neki teološki duhovni kontekst. Ja duboko verujem da je teologija interesantna i da je duhovnost interesantna, takav je intro našeg kanala i da možemo promišljati o svemu koristeći tu prizmu duhovnosti. Tako da danas koristimo prizmu duhovnosti da bi pričao sa mojim prijateljima o roditeljstvu i sa mnom su dvoje iskusnih roditelja, Monte i Albina. Welcome to Teologija with Morning Coffee.
Oh, thanks.
Drago mi da ste ovde. I'm very glad that you are with me. I uvek kad god imam goste, od njih očekujem da se predstave i da ispričaju svoje svečanstvo, pa ću to tražiti od njih. So can you share your testimony just to introduce yourself?
Just to introduce myself. Well, thanks. My testimony is, well, first of all, I'm from America. Albina is from Russia. So.
On je iz Amerike, Albina iz Rusije.
So my testimony is pretty simple.
Moje svedočanstvo je jako jednostavno.
I grew up in the church.
Odrastao sam u crkvi.
Not so much because my parents were strong Christians, but because it's part of the American culture.
Ne zato što su moji roditelji bili neki veliki vjernici, nego to prosto bilo deo američke kulture.
Yeah. But I went to church every Sunday.
Svake nedelje sam išao u crkvu.
Heard the sermons.
Sam slušao propovedi.
Was in Sunday school, so the Sunday school teachers
taught us. Išao u nedeljnu školu, to je rad sa decom.
And over time I accepted it.
I prosto vremenom sam prihvatio tu poruku.
And then one time up at a camp in the mountains of Colorado.
I jednom smo bili na nekom kampu u planinama Kolorada.
There was a preacher talking about salvation.
I tamo je propovednik govorio o spasenju.
And he gave an invitation to us 12 and 13-year-olds.
Pozvao je nas, bili smo 13-godišnjaci, 14-godišnjaci.
And I gave my life to the Lord.
I tog momenta ja sam se molio, predao svoj život Hristu, to jest poverovao.
After that I never doubted my faith.
I od tada nikada nisam sumnjao u svoju veru.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily grow very fast in my faith.
Ne znači da sam rastao nešto jako brzo.
But it didn't happen really until college.
Ali do univerziteta.
But I was always just convinced that Jesus died for my sins.
Znači, pošto sam raspao sa univerziteta, ali sam uvijek bio uveren da je Hristos moj spasitelj. Yeah. And you still believe, you don't have any doubts?
No, it's I still study and I'm just still more and more convinced the more I read, the more I learn. It convinces me more of the truth that I had, that I understood then.
Da, obično pitam to zašto i dalje veruje, tako da se njega pitao i dalje veruješ i on kaže da njegova vera raste vremenom i da prosto studiranje svega onoga o Bogu ga uverava da je to istinitost. Thank you. Albina?
Well, my story is very different because I grew up in Russia in the republic called Tatarstan.
Odrasla je u Rusiji, u Tatarstanu.
I grew up in a Tatar home. My parents are Tatar.
Njeni roditelji su Tatari.
Which means that if you do believe in God, you're supposed to believe in Allah.
A Tatari su po njihovoj religijskoj pripadnosti muslimani i veruju u Allaha.
But my parents did not believe in God.
Ali oni nisu verovali.
So in my childhood I never heard anything about God until I was 18.
I do 18 godina nikad nisam ništa čula o Bogu, ništa o tome.
When I was studying in college, I was studying English and I went to translate for short-term missionaries.
Ok, studirao sam engleski i otišao sam da prevodim za neke misionare.
That was the first time that I met people who really believe in God.
I to je bio moment kada sam prvi put srela ljude koji stvarno veruju u Boga.
I was very surprised because it just blew my mind that people nowadays who are not sick, who are not old and educated can believe in God.
Mene to prosto bilo jako čudno da ljudi koji nisu bolesni, koji nisu neobrazovani i veruju u Boga, nisam prosto to susretao.
I think many people of my age thought about it like that, that you have to be really old and sick.
Moja generacija prosto tako razmišljala da moraš biti star i bolestan da bi uopšte verovao.
So it was amazing to me to live with a family of Christians who were educated.
I prosto mi je bilo interesantno da se uzretnem i živim sa hrišćanima koji su obrazovani.
They were not sick.
Nisu bili bolesni.
They read the Bible every day and they tried to live that accordingly.
Čitali su Bibliju svaki dan i pokušavaju da žive tu reč.
I think the example of their life there really impressed on me that there must be God.
I prosto taj njihov primjer me je ubedio da mora postoji Bog.
And then I heard the gospel for a few days every day.
I prosto slušao sam tih dana kao prevodioc evanđelja više puta u toku dana.
So I made a decision to believe it and explore it, and I gave my life to the Lord at that time.
I nekako sam odlučio da želim to da istražim i da prosto dam svoj život Bogu.
I came home and shared with my parents who were very surprised.
A podelio sam to sa mojim roditeljima kad sam došao kući, oni su bili šokirani.
And since then I had a few years that was hard for me and my parents to talk about it, but now they accept me the way I am.
I to je bilo jako teško za njih da to prihvate, imali smo teške razgovore, ali sad je to okej.
It's pretty fun too. Occasionally when we're in America, we still see the lady that led her to Christ. She's in about 92, 93 years old.
I dalje susreću tu gospođu koja je bila u Rusiji, koja je prevodila, koja ima sad 92 godine, znači kad putuje u Ameriku i susretnu, wow. And why you still believe?
Well, it did change my life, and I understand that God did something for me that I never knew that is possible. He loves me the way I am.
Ono što je meni značajno jeste da je on dotakao moj život i prosto učinio nešto što nikšta drugo nije mogao da učini.
He knows my heart, he knows that I'm not perfect and I do bad things.
I on me poznaje i zna moje srce, zna da nisam savršen.
But he loves me and he wants to help me and he died on the cross for all my sins.
Da. I umro je na krstu za mene i voli me i to me prosto drži blizu njega. Wow.
So that gives me confidence in who I am. I am the daughter of God and I try to live accordingly.
I znam ko sam, da sam dete Božije i živim u skladu sa onim na što me pozvao. Wow, really interesting. For me it's always special to meet somebody who is Tatar and Christian. Because we have some history here with Tatars. Kažem, za mene uvek posebno da se usretnem Tatar i Hrišćan, mi ovdje imamo neku istoriju sa Tatarima. So great. Monty, how you came to Russia, what's happened, and how you start to work with parenting? Znači, pitao sam ga kada je, zašto je otišao u Rusiju i zašto je uopšte počeo da radi na temu roditeljstva.
There's a long story and there's a short story. I'll share the short story.
Da, podelit ću kratku priču, ne dugačku.
The long story just means God works in your heart bit by bit to open you up to ideas.
Znači, Bog radi korak po korak da te otvori za njegove ideje.
But the short story is basically in the 1990s in Russia.
U 90. godinama u Rusiji.
I think maybe like it was in Serbia too. People were the end of communism, the end of the Soviet
Union. Sovjetska unija.
People were looking for things.
Ljudi su prosto tražili nešto.
They were looking for answers.
Tražili su odgovore.
They didn't even know some of the questions, but they were looking for answers.
Čak nisu znali ni pitanja, ali su tražili neke odgovore.
And some of the people looked toward to religion. Some people looked toward Christianity.
Traže tu religiju, hrišćanstvo.
And really in the 1990s, especially the first part of the 90s, lots of people came to Christ.
I u početku 90. godina mnogi stvarno su se okrenuli Hristu.
Lots of new churches were started.
Mnogo novih crkava je tamo osnovano.
And kind of through an evangelist, a Ukrainian evangelist that worked in Russia.
I kroz jednog ukrajinskog evanđelistu koji radi u Rusiji.
He invited some people that I knew and they invited me.
On je pozvao neke ljude koje sam ja poznao, oni su pozvali mene.
So they invited me to come and just help the churches grow
da pomognem u rastu
and to start some new churches.
I osnivanju novih crkava.
So and in the process of being there, I met Albina.
I u procesu dok sam bio tamo se sreo sam Albinu.
I didn't fall in love right away.
Nismo se odmah zaljubili.
But after a couple years,
ali posle nekog vremena,
God led us to marry, and
Bog ih prosto dao jedno drugome, oženili su se.
And gave us 8 wonderful children.
How many?
8 children. Yeah.
8 divne dece. Wow.
Sometimes I say I have 8 and she has 8, so I ask how many children do we have?
Da, kad kaže ja imam 8, ona ima 8, koliko imamo zajedno? 8.
Sometimes people answer 16.
Nekad ljudi se zalete pa kažu 16, ali 8.
But we met and we started a new church at first in 1998.
Kada smo se venčali, onda smo i osnovali jednu tamo crkvu zajedno.
A larger church that was new, but started in 1991. It was in one part of town.
Jer velika crkva je bila u jednom dijelu grada, osnovno 91. godine.
And we took a small part and tried to start a church in another part of town. I
kako to se radi o osnivanju novih crkva, deo vernika je prešao s njim u drugi deo grada kako bi tamo započeo.
And this was still in the 90s, so people were pretty receptive still.
I tada su ljudi još uvek u 90-im bili otvoreni da to čuju.
And things were good enough that actually a year later we took another small team and started in another part of town.
I tako je išlo dobro da smo na kraju još jedan tim uzeli potišu drugi deo grada.
It was kind of a fun time. We would just invite people to an event and lots of people would come.
Prosto dešavalo se da jednostavno pozvali bi ljude na neki događaj i svi bi ljudi prosto došli.
Or we'd invite people to our home and people would come into our home.
Pozvali bi ih kući i ljudi bi došli u naš dom.
And in a period of about 2 months, I remember 3 people just accepting Jesus on our couch in our living room.
Sećam se tih dana, par ljudi je prihvatilo Hrista prosto sedeći na našem kauču.
Yeah, so it was a really fun time then.
I bilo je jako zabavno to.
But then things changed.
I onda su stvari krenule mijenjati.
I think a lot of people stopped looking for God, but they started to think materialism. They started to think.
Jednostavno ljudi su okrenuli materializmu.
So we invite people to our home and they wouldn't come.
Ja pozvao bi kod nas kuću, nisu želi da dođu.
They invite us to an event and they wouldn't necessarily come.
Pa ili ne bi došli na događaj na koji bi ih pozvali.
So Albina and I and a few friends, we started to think, well,
ja sam počeli da razmišljamo, ja i Albina i drugi prijatelji, kako možemo podeliti ljubav Hristu sa ljudima u našoj zajednici.
So I think God gave me like 2 questions to ask ourselves.
I to je prosto otvorilo 2 pitanja koje su postavili sebi.
The first question was in trying to answer what do we need to do.
A osim toga šta treba da uradimo.
Just, well, what are the needs? What are the felt needs in the community?
Koje su to one osnovne, najveće potrebe ljudi u našem društvu?
And this was about 2001, 2002.
Znači to oko 2001. godine.
And there was lots of needs.
Je bilo puno potrebe još uvek.
One of the needs was in the area of marriage and family.
Ali ono što smo mi videli jeste potrebu u oblasti roditeljstva i braka.
I think if I remember right, in 2001 the divorce rate in Russia got up to about 90%.
90?
90, yeah.
Wow. Kao znači došlo da u toj oblasti 90% brakova se raspadalo.
So they measured how many marriages that year and how many divorces. So like for every 1,000 marriages there's 900 divorces.
No da, znači na 1000 brakova 900 bi se razvelo, toliko su bile užasne.
It was only that bad for a little while. It got down to like 50-60%. Usually it's about 60% now.
Ali kasnije to naravno palo, to je kratko vrijeme trajalo, pa je otišlo na 50-60%.
So we saw that was kind of the need that kind of caught our attention.
I to je prosto bilo potreba koja je jednostavno skrenuo našu pažnju.
Yeah. Another question he gave us is, well, what are the two of you interested in? What do you like to talk about?
I onda prosto drugo pitanje je bilo šta je to što nas interesuje, o čemu volite da pričate.
Yeah. And ever since my parents divorced when I was young,
I od kad su se moji roditelji razveli, kad sam bio mali,
the question of family and marriage is always very important to me.
Jednostavno to pitanje porodice i roditeljstva je bilo značajno za mene.
So we kind of put those two answers together, our interest in family and the need in the community of family.
Te dve stvari su prosto došle zajedno, znači potreba društva i naša želja, to je šta volimo da radimo.
And we kind of decided to become experts, if you would.
I prosto odlučili smo da želimo tu da napredimo, postanemo eksperti u toj oblasti.
Albina went back and got a second degree in psychology.
Albina je krenula studirati, dobila drugi diplomu iz psihologije.
And I went got a doctorate in marriage and family counseling.
A ja sam otišao i doktorirao na savjetovanju brača.
And God opened lots of doors.
I prosto to je otvorilo jako puno vrata za nas. Wow.
Yeah.
We were blessed by opportunities in our town. We were invited by schools.
I prosto zvali su na škole, bili smo blagosloveni različitim mogućnostima tada.
Different centers.
Različiti centri su nas zvali.
Also, there is a marriage bureau, the place where people register their marriages.
Znači, kod matičara bio, znači, to je kao office tamo nje.
And we just went there and asked if they would like our services, and they said, yes, every week you can come with a lecture.
Da, i pitali smo matičara da li mogu oni tamo nekako da poslužu, on rekao svake nedelje možete da imate vaše sastanke, to je predavanja.
And we realized that one-time lecture is nothing, so we kind of developed different courses.
I shvatili smo da jedno predavanje nije dovoljno, nego smo razvili različite kurseve.
So one course was for parents, and the other one was for husbands and wives.
A znači jedan bio za roditeljstvo, a drugi je bio za to je muževe i žene.
So many people in our town actually went through that, and I think that was a very helpful thing.
I jednostavno mnogi su prošli kroz to u našem gradu i to je bilo jako, jako korisno.
In the process we went preached the gospel, but we'd always share that we're Christians and the importance that is in our lives.
Da, uvijek bi delili to da znače Hrista u našem životu kad bi to radili. Great. And you was parents, so that is you learn through your parenting.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the thing that always gave us credibility with the audience was the fact that we had lots of kids.
Kažem, naučili su oni kroz njihovo roditeljstvo i on kaže da, to je davalo njima veliku.
Most of the time we presented together and they saw that we loved each other.
Da, ono što bi bilo da bi videli da se oni vole međusobno.
And they when they heard we had 8 kids, they always kind of wanted to come and visit. You really have 8 kids and are they happy?
Da, kad vide da imaju decu, da su deca sretna, to bi bilo velik plus.
So usually after our schools, lots of people would come. We'd always have people come over to our home.
Znači, posle tog predavanja škole, ljudi bi dolazili do njih i videli to. Great, yes. So, what was helpful for you in your...
I think, it's a quite interesting question. And when I remember when we were just pregnant, or I wasn't actually pregnant, but when Albina was pregnant with her first child, we were just excited. We weren't really thinking ahead.
But we had friends. We were in America when I was expecting, and there were a few families in the church. Znači, kada je čekala bebu,
nisu znali šta da radi, i bilo je nekoliko ljudi u
who had many children, and they were very strong in their faith.
I imali su dosta dece, a ujedno su bili jaki u njihovom verovanju.
So they offered a few books that we actually, we just hold on to them because they were very helpful.
I jednostavno ponudili su nam nekoliko knjiga koji su za nas bile jako korisne.
So there are 2 books. One of them is called On Becoming Baby Wise.
Znači prvo je Baby Wise ili Mudro roditeljstvo, excellent book. Yeah.
And the other one was Train Up a Child.
A drugo je trenirati vaše dete. Is same Baby Wise or no? This training up your child?
No, those are 2 different books.
Yeah.
And both of them were talking about a Christian perspective, how to train.
Obe knjige su govorile sa hrišćanskog perspektive.
And based on the verse from the Proverbs 22:6.
Znači iz poslovica, can you repeat?
Train up a child in the way he should go.
And when he is old, he will not depart from it. Putem koji treba da ide i ono...
Proverbs 22:6.
22:6.
So it basically taught us to be proactive in our parenting.
Da budemo prosto proaktivni u našem roditeljstvu.
And I liked different examples that the families there presented, and we tried them with our children, and it worked.
Da, videli smo puno primjera porodica koje su tamo navedeni i probali smo njihove principe i videli da to rade. For me and Mira, Baby Wise was important too. Maybe most important book. And I buy you know, I was in England in one library, and I look in the books, and somebody said, "Oh, this is a good book about parenting." Miro expected a child, so I buy that book, and I didn't know absolutely, you know, but it was transformational for us. Podelio sam naše iskustvo, gdje sam u Engleskoj nekoj knjižari razmišljao koju knjigu da kupim za Miru, i Mira je tad čekala Unu. I neko mi rekao, ovo je odlična knjiga i ja kupim taj Baby Wise i za nas je to stvarno bilo transformational.
Sometimes people ask, how did you have 8 children?
Nekada pitaju kako imate 8 djece.
And there's 2 answers I'd usually give them.
Obično dajem 2 odgovora.
One had to do like with Baby Wise, they slept through the night after a couple months.
Jedan od razloga jeste, u Baby Wise-u se razvija način kako da beba spava tokom noći i koji je veoma funkcionalan.
So it wasn't too hard really because they were sleeping.
I prosto nije bilo preteško zato što su spavali.
then my other answer was always a little bit different.
A drugi bi bio onako malo drugačiji.
It was, I would say, because I have why do I have 8 children? I'd always say, because I have a really good mother-in-law.
Aha, i kada bi me pitali zašto imam 8 dece, ja bih rekao imam odličnu taštu.
Because when we had little ones, they would take the slightly older ones.
Kad smo imali, aha, okej, ja nisam dobro razumeo, znači što bi starije deca uzimala mlađu decu.
So when we had 4 kids, but we were only taking care of 2 kids when they were taking care of 2.
Jer kad bi dvoje dece, to jest imao bi 4, ali dvoje bi se brinulo za dvoje.
So we thought, this isn't too hard, we'll have some more kids.
Znači shvatili smo, pošto su naše deca brinuo međusobno, jedni od drugih možemo imati još dece.
Yeah, so the mother-in-law helped a lot, and father-in-law too.
Da, ali su nam i taj, tašta i tas pomagali isto. Wow.
I think in reading the books, I think one of the things we learned in general was that
tiče čitanje knjige, jedna stvar koju smo naučili
is that you can, there's a part of being a parent that it helps to plan and kind of prepare.
Jeste, postoji deo planiranja i biti pripremljen.
And I think as we interacted with parents, it's one of the things that we saw was missing.
I to je nešto što smo primijetili da nedostaje, to planiranje.
We sometimes give an example, like in Russia, I don't know how it is in Serbia.
Ne znam kako je u Srbiji, ali u Rusiji je bilo tako.
But to get a driver's license, you have to study for at least 3 months.
Da bi dobio dozvolu za vožnju, moraš 3 mjeseca da prođeš kroz učenje. Dosta vreme platiš novca za tako
nešto. And then you have to take an exam, a written
položeš
exam,
ispite,
and a driving exam.
pisane vožnje i tako dalje.
And then I ask people, why do you have to study so much just to learn how to drive? I was driving on the farm when I was like 7 or 8 years old.
I prosto pitao sam ljude, znači zašto morate toliko dugo da učite da vozite, pošto je on živio na farmi još kao dete počeo da vozi.
And people would say, well, we have to do that for our bezopasnost, for our safety.
Ali ljudi bi mu odgovorio, pa to je bitno za naše bezbednost.
So it was always interesting. We study so much just to learn how to drive.
I bilo mi interesantno, toliko puno se uči da bi naučio da voziš.
But we don't really study to become husband and wife.
Ali nikada se neko ne priprema da bi bio muž i žena.
And we don't really study to be mom and dads.
Ili ne pripremamo se da budemo mama i tata.
So what we learned a little bit from the books and then just from talking people is...
I naučili smo nešto malo od... Sorry, I need to stop. Okay. I naučili smo neke stvari od njih, da. Kako su oni bili efikasni roditelji.
So we just learned that if we could help parents to kind of plan things out, it would help quite a bit.
Ako pomognemo roditeljima malo da planiraju svoje roditeljstvo unapred, to će im puno pomoći.
One of the things that kind of helped in the process was when I was studying at the seminary, getting my doctorate.
Jedna stvar koja je nama pomogla je dok sam pripremao moj doktorat.
One of the professors would say this one line often.
Jedan profesor je često koristio jednu rečenicu.
He would say that you only need to know 3 things in life to succeed.
Kao trebate znati 3 stvari u životu da biste bili uspešni.
I thought if you only need to know 3 things, why am I paying so much for my doctorate?
Ja sam pitao, pa ako treba znati samo 3 stvari, pa što onda plaćam toliko za doktorat?
But I like these 3 things that you just remember certain things from your studies, and this is one of the things I remember.
Ali ovo je nešto što sam zapamtilo iz tog studiranja.
And he said you just need these 3 things.
Kaže ove 3 stvari.
You kind of need to know who you are.
Treba da znaš ko si.
You need to know where you want to get to.
Treba da znaš gde trebaš da odeš.
And then you need to create a path to get from here to there, basically.
I trebaš da onda napraviš put da bi stigao negde. Interesting, I teach with the same words people how to orient in nature. You need to where you are, where you want to go and create. Kažem, kada učim ljude orijentacije, to su 3 osnovne stvari.
And then I would do the same thing. My uncle taught me how to use a map and do orienteering.
Da, isto kao njegov uvijek.
And then, so a lot of times when we explain the idea, we'd say, well, you take a map.
I često kad to govorimo, mi koristimo mapu.
Or even you take a GPS now.
Da, GPS.
And if you decide, well, first thing you got to do is decide where you want to go.
A prvo moraš da odlučiš gde hoćeš da ideš.
And if I want to go, for example, here, if I want to go to Budapest, for example.
Na primjer, hoću da odem do Budimpešte.
Okay, I find Budapest on the map.
Nađem Budimpešte na mapi.
Or GPS finds it for me.
Da, i GPS nađe to za mene.
And on a map, you also have to figure out a simple thing.
I moraš da nađeš i odrediš i neke jednostavne stvari.
You got to figure out where you're at.
Možeš da nađeš gde si, tačno nalaziš.
And it's easy if we're in Novi Sad.
Jednostavno ako si u Novom Sadu.
If you're in the mountains or something, it's harder.
Ali ako si u planini, to je mnogo teže.
But then, so we find out we're in Novi Sad. GPS again helps us with our location.
Da, ali ako koristimo GPS, on nam pomogne u Novom Sadu da nađemo našu lokaciju.
Then with GPS, you push a button.
Pritisneš dugme i on te
And
nađe.
it gives you different routes.
I ponudi ti razne puteve do cilja.
And I think from here, if we do that, it would show us a route through Subotica, basically to Budapest.
Da, verovatno će nas odavde voditi preko Subotice.
But if you look at the map, you also can go through Sombor to get to Budapest.
Ako pogledaš na mapu, prosto vidiš da može i preko Sombora da odeš do.
And then if you look too, you can actually go through Timișoara to get
ali
to
moguće i preko Temišvara, malo je okolo, ali možeš.
So I'd ask people to, which way would be the best way.
I onda pitaš ljude, pa koji je najbolji put?
And of course in Russia the cities are different.
Da, u Rusiji su gradovi malo drugačiji.
But they'd all say through Subotica.
Ali na primjer će reći ovdje u našem kontekstu kroz Suboticu.
I'd ask them why.
A onda je pitan zašto?
Well, they say, because it's the quickest.
Zato što kažu, pa to je najbrži put.
But what that assumes is the most important thing is to get there quickly.
Ali to prosto pretpostavlja da je najbitnija stvar od svega da dođeš do neke tačke brzo.
But there's lots of other good things to do on the way.
Ali postoji dobre stvari koje možeš da uradiš na putu.
So the route depends really on what's important to me.
Ali i prosto zavisi od toga šta je meni značajno. Znači od toga određujem kojim putem ću ići.
So I'd always tell them I'd go through Sombor.
Možda ću odabrati da idem kroz Sombor.
Again, the cities are different in Russia.
Da, ali kažem u Rusiji, eto, to su prosto...
And they'd ask, why would you go that way?
Ali, zašto bi se išli tim putem?
I'd explain because my children's grandparents live in Sombor.
Zato što prosto tamo žive moji baba i deda.
And we had lots of kids.
Imamo puno dece.
So we stuck them in the car, we put them in the van.
Potrpat ćemo ih sve u
we go through Sombor.
Proći kroz Sombor.
We show up there.
Stati tamo.
The kids would be happy because they get to spend time with grandma and grandpa.
Da, i ostavi tih i deca će biti sretna
da
ostanu tamo sa bako i deko. Baka i deka će biti sretni i smo ih dovezli tamo.
We're happy because we get
Mi smo sretni i smo zajedno sami.
And then we go on to Budapest to do our own things.
I odemo u Budimpeštu da odradimo neke naše potrebe.
Then say a day or two later we come back.
I dva kasnije mi dođemo nazad.
The kids are happy.
Deca sretna.
And the grandparents are happy.
A baka i deka pa sretni.
They give us big sacks of potatoes.
Da, daju nam puno torbu.
They give us 30, 60, 90 eggs.
Krompira, daju nam 40 jaja.
Cheese and milk.
Mlijeko, sir.
Because they have all that stuff in the village.
Jer imaju to u selu, Sombor je selo, još čuo zove.
And we come back to Novi Sad.
I onda se vratimo u Novi Sad.
And everybody would be happy.
I svi će biti sretni.
And the illustrations, just to point out, there's different things to do on the way. The quickest route isn't necessarily the best route.
Znači, najbrži put ne znači da je uvijek najbolji.
So Albin, how's this kind of look actually with parenting then?
Sad pitam kako to funkcioniše u roditeljstvu.
With parenting, you also need to know where you're at right now. So we in
Prosto i u roditeljstvu ti možeš da znaš gde se nalaziš.
We basically in our classes we have a small chart that
imaju
looks like
kao, znaš, kao chart je tabelu.
And we kind of do the same thing. We try to explain that you need to know what would you like to see in your family or in your children in 5 years. Da,
prosto postavi se to pitanje šta želiš da se desi sa tvojim detetom za 5 godina, kako da ono bude.
Or in a year.
Ili u godinu dana.
And then you look at who you are right now and your children also.
I gledaš prosto ko si ti i tvoje deca.
So we basically, we start filling out the chart in our classroom and then they finish it at home, but we write down all our strengths and weaknesses.
Ono što su radili jeste da su sa svojim ljudima na časovima radili te tabele, ali razmišljaju o svojim jakim stranama, slabostima.
And it's also for us as parents and for each child separately.
Da, i onda bi to uradili za sebe, ali i decu ako bi imali za svako dete šta je tako.
And then when you see a goal, for example, you have a child who is 1.5 years old.
Na primjer, ako vidiš jasan cilj, imaš dete koje je godinu i po dana staro.
And you want by next Christmas that he would be potty trained and would be able to dress himself.
I prosto želiš da ono počne da koristi nošu i da zna samo da se obuče.
So you make those steps how to get there within a year.
Prosto napraviš plan kako ćeš doći do tog cilja. Yeah.
And it can be for any children and it doesn't have to be big milestones, but they are intentional
znači, ne
goals.
moraju biti veliki ciljevi, ali moraju biti nešto što planirano radiš da dođeš do tog cilja.
Another example, if it's small children, for example, many parents are afraid that their children will get burnt by something hot.
Da, na primjer, mnogi roditelji se boje da će im se deca opeći od nečega.
So we say, well, how can you teach to take care of that danger? How can you prevent it?
Znači onda prosto uzmemo taj primjer kako da ti deluješ preventivno da se to ne desi.
And it's just simple steps that you,
jednostavno mali koraci.
As an example, you for a few days in a row, when you have your hot cup of tea or
na primjer,
coffee.
za par dana u redu dok imaš u rukama toplu šolju čaja.
You have a child on your lap.
Imaš dete na svom krilu.
And you hold your child and your hand and his hand and let him feel the heat but not get burned. And you say,
prosto mu daš da osjeti toplinu preko tvoje ruke i da mu kaže ovo je toplo, to je zvrelo, ali da se ono ne opeče.
So the first time he'll be really surprised and look at you like, what's happening?
On gleda šokiran šta je to sve dešava.
But then you say hot and then you take it away and put back and say hot. So he understands that.
Staviš mu ruku pa odmakneš ruku i kažeš toplo, vrelo i tako dalje i ono počinje to da razume šta se dešava.
Do it a few days in a row and with every little thing that you want to teach, you have to be consistent and very intentional.
I radiš par dana tako i sa svim bilo čime što radiš sa detetom ti može biti ciljno uporan da se to postane deo njegovog života.
And it's fun to see results when you put your work into it and then a month later or 2 months later you see that he's getting it and you actually taught him as a parent.
I onda je interesantno vidjeti taj napredak, znači da ti nešto radiš sa njima i onda za nekoliko mjeseci vidiš njihov napredak.
With older kids it can be character traits.
Za sve decu to može biti pitanje karaktera.
For example, to be generous because a baby is born in the family.
Znači da izgradiš neke karakterne osobine koje želiš da budeš, na primjer velikodušnost ili ljubaznost ako dolazi nova beba.
So you work on that, you play games, you teach him to be generous within the family. I think most of the things parents need to teach them at home.
Znači čekate bebu i onda kroz neki seriju igara pripremaš ga kako da dočeka kad beba dođe u kuću. Yeah, interesting.
I think we got that from How to Train Up a Child from that book.
To smo i uzeli iz te knjige kako istrenirati svoje dete.
And you just say take like 15 to 20 minutes every day as a training time for your children.
I tamo piše savjet, odvojite 15 minuta svaki dan da pomognete vašem detetu.
One of the funniest examples we had is just we thought we'd try this. And we trained, Albina trained our maybe was it 2.5-year-old.
I tako je učuo dete 2,5 godine.
Listen that, a crawling child.
Even taught him before that. You can tell the story about the chessboard.
Okay. We had a really nice leather chessboard with brass pieces.
Da, imali smo lepu šahovsku tablu sa ovim figurama od bronze.
So we taught the older kids not to touch it.
I prosto učili smo stariju decu da to ne diraju.
And the fun example that he's saying...
So you teach them, they come up and walk to it and you just take them away or you'd punish them a little bit if they came close.
Da, prosto kada pokušaju da priđu dobiju neku kaznicu.
So over time they realize they just shouldn't come close to it.
Or they can come close but not touch it, just look.
Ili da dođu blizu, ali da to ne diraju, ne razbijaju.
And then when the third child, I think, was born, what Monte is asking me to share.
I onda kada je se treće dete rodilo.
Zoe just learned to crawl, so she came into the living room and for the first time crawled far enough to the table.
I prosto dopuzala je do tog stola.
And her older brother, who's like a year older, is only 2.5.
Brat koji je samo godinu i nešto stariji od nje bio.
He ran real fast, stood guarding the table and was yelling, no Zoe, don't touch, no!
Trčao je ispred stola, rekao, ne Zoe, ne diraj ovo, ne diraj.
There's nothing dangerous about it, but there are limits that they accept and respect.
Znači, to nije ništa opasno, ali smo postavili neke granice koje su oni naučili da poštuju.
So we never hid anything in the family. We just teach them to some things. This is yes and this is no.
Mi prosto učili smo ih ovo je da, ovo je ne. Da, okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
So you mentioned some other exercise or this was example that you wanted to share?
Those are examples and stuff. One of the difficulties we had with parents, or what we noticed that parents had difficulties with, is that they understand the idea, but one of the things they didn't really quite understand is like what...
Često ljudi nisu razumeli sledeću stvar.
They didn't actually understand where they wanted to go, basically.
Aha, znači da u načelu nisu znali kojim smerom žele da idu.
They didn't really know what a successful family would look like for them.
Kako bi to za njih izgledalo uspešna porodica.
We taught them that a successful family for us might look different than a successful family for you.
I prosto da za njih je možda slika uspešne porodice jedno, a za njih je nešto drugo.
So it was interesting. So we kind of actually went through different exercises to help them understand what successful would look like for them.
I često bi radili kao neku vežbu da oni nauče šta je za njih zapravo uspešna porodica. Da definišu to.
We talk about their values.
A često bi govorili o njihovim vrednostima porodičnim.
We just did different exercises so they could understand what was important to them.
Da shvate šta je to prosto značajno za njih kao porodicu.
And if it's important to them, help them to think about, well, how can you pass those values on to your own children.
I ako su to vrednosti koje su njima značajne, kako onda oni te vrednosti prenesu na njihovu decu?
Usually I think parents, we just go with the culture.
I često mi roditelji idemo prosto kakva je naša kultura.
Go with the flow, basically.
Ono što je tog momenta talas koji nosi.
But I think early on we decided, looking at the American culture especially.
I mi posmatrajući našu američku kulturu došli smo do zaključka
we didn't want to go with the culture.
Da ne želimo prosto da idemo s kulturom.
It's headed in the wrong direction.
Da shvatili smo da ide u pogrešnom smeru i nismo hteli da
So we need to be intentional about where we want to go.
Že mi smo želi da odaberemo naš put. Interesting. Yeah. Just I never think about planning. Maybe it was natural for me and Mira, but I never
But if you look at a businessman, if for example he rents an office and he knows what he wants to do, he doesn't just sit in the office.
Da, ja sam rekao kako možda smo Mira i ja radili to prirodno, a nismo nikad razmišljali da je to planiranje, a sad Albina spominje za neko biznismena da on razmišlja o tome kuda hoće da ide njegov ofis.
So to be successful, he plans it and he actually moves and all of his actions are in that direction.
On prosto sve svoje aktivnosti usmerava ka tom cilju kojem želi da dođe.
I think parenting is as important as any business in the world.
I prosto roditeljstvo je kao svaki posao, znači čak i značajnije od bilo kog posla. Yeah, I agree. Interesting. So, šta je bilo za vas najznačajnije kada ste podizali djece? Ili kako ste vi definisali taj uspeh? Znači, pošto smo već spominjali uspeh.
Basically, I think parents actually do not realize what they would like to they don't understand what it means to be for their children successful. I think they think that they should have a lot of money.
A oni prosto roditelji često ne znaju zapravo šta to znači da je nešto najbolje i nekada je to kao, želimo da imate puno novca.
How to use the new technology.
Kako koristi novu tehnologiju.
So they try to send their kids out for other people to teach them.
I onda razmišljaju da je to najznačajnije za njihovo dete i onda usmeravaju svoje dete u tom smeru da zna da zaradi ili da koristi tu novu tehnologiju.
So I think that the values is very important lesson for us to understand that we give the most important things. And for us being Christians, it is different values.
Ali sa druge strane naše vrednosti su ono što najznačajnije, a posebno za nas koji smo hrišćani, to je bila najznačajnija stvar koju smo mi želi da usmerimo našu decu.
And the Bible, it's not a journal, it's not a book to tell you how to train up your children.
Znači, Biblija nije knjiga koja te uči kako da treniraš svoje dete.
But there are lots of important principles you can take.
Ali u njoj se nalazi puno značajnih stvari koje možemo upotrebiti.
And I think one of our central verses is just Ephesians 6:4.
Za nas jedan od najznačajnijih jeste Efežanima 6:4.
And Paul tells fathers,
da tamo kaže očevi,
but I think it can be fathers and mothers.
Ali možemo reći da to važi i za majke. He tells us
two important things.
Kaže dve bitne stvari.
He basically tells us what we should be doing as Christian parents.
Kaže šta treba da radimo kao roditelji.
And he tells us how to do it.
I onda nam kaže kako da to uradimo.
In the verse it basically says, don't provoke your children to anger.
Kaže, nemojte provocirati bes u vašoj deci.
But raise them up in the instruction and the teachings of the Lord.
Nego ih odgajajte u mudrosti Gospodnje ili savetu Gospodnje.
So God's telling us as Christians, it's the most important thing you can do.
Za nas kao hrišćani, ono što nam Bog kaže, najznačajnija stvar koju možete da uradite
is to teach your children about Jesus.
Jeste da poučimo našu decu o Isusu.
Other things are good.
Druge stvari su takođe bitne.
It's not bad to earn money. It's not bad to be a good athlete.
Nije loše biti dobar atletičar ili zarađivati novac.
But sometimes those things distract us from the most important things.
Ali nekada te stvari znaju da nam skrenu pažnju sa najbitnije stvari.
But the most important thing is to just train them up in knowing
Ali
Jesus.
najznačajnije stvar jeste da ih vodimo u tom pravom putu, a to je instrukcija Gospodnja.
Yeah, and I like how Paul continues in Colossians 3.
I u Kološanima 3:21 on nastavlja.
He says, don't provoke them, don't irritate them.
Kaže, nemojte ih nervirati bukvalno.
So they don't become frustrated.
Kako ne bi postali frustrirani i obeshrabreni.
Because if we do our parenting wrong, they become frustrated, and a frustrated child doesn't do very well.
Jer ako mi učinimo našim roditeljstvom da je naše dete frustrirano, to nije uopšte dobro za njega.
So maybe a couple examples.
Nekoliko primjera.
One example is just so if my main goal is to raise up the child to know God, how do I do that?
Ako ja želim da moje dete poznaje Boga, da veruje u Boga, kako je to da uradim?
And I like to when I see good examples, I steal the good examples.
Ja volim da ukradem dobre primjere.
And when we just had one or two small children,
I kada smo imali jedno ili dvoje mali dece,
I visited an American friend in a different city in Russia.
Posjetili smo američki neki par u drugom gradu.
And I'd come for a year or so. I'd come about once a month to his home.
I znali bi da ih posjetimo jednom mesečno.
And spend the night there.
A prespavamo tamo kod njih.
And each evening,
I svako večer,
he and his wife would go into their children's room.
On i njegova supruga bi odlazio u dečju sobu.
And they had 3 children, a little bit older than ours.
Imali 3 dece, malo stariji nego naša deca.
And he'd pick up his guitar.
A uzeo bi gitaru.
And sing a few Christian songs.
Ne, otpevali nekoliko hrišćanskih pesama.
Then they'd read a little bit from scripture, not a lot, but just a little bit.
Malo bi čitali Svetog pisma.
And then they'd pray together.
I onda bi se molili zajedno.
And just after seeing that many times,
I kada smo to videli puno puta,
I said, that's a good idea.
Pomislio se, pa to je stvarno dobra ideja.
And I mentioned it to Albina.
Pa predložio sam Albini isto.
And we've been doing it ever since for about 20 years, over 20 years now.
I od tada smo to radili redovno, 20 godina.
Yeah, we changed it a little bit now that we're in Serbia.
A sad kad smo u Srbiji to radimo malo drugačije.
We just have the youngest 2 children with us.
Sad samo 2 najmlađih sa nama.
And the kids are homeschooling.
A deca su u toj nekoj kućne škole.
Or they study through a private school in America, but they do everything at home.
Znači zapravo idu u privatnu školu u Americi, ali se sve radi kroz to kućno obrazovanje.
But before they start studying,
a pre nego što su počeli da studiraju u 8 sati,
8 o'clock we gather together.
Mi bi se okupimo se zajedno.
On Monday I share a word from scripture and we talk about it.
Ja ono što uradim jeste da podelim neku poruku iz Svetog pisma.
And then on Tuesday Albina does.
Utorak to radi Albina.
Then Robert, our 16-year-old, on Wednesday he shares.
A u sredu naš 16-godišnjeg Robert on to uradi.
And then on Thursday Sammy, our 13-year-old, shares.
A onda dečak koji ima 13 godina isto to uradi u četvrtak.
It doesn't have to be a grand sermon, but
to ne mora biti neka velika propoved.
But just some thoughts that they had from reading the Bible.
Nego prosto neke misli koje oni imaju iz njihovog tog ličnog čitanja Svetog pisma.
And as we do that, it's just it enforces in our children's mind that the most important thing is to know Jesus.
I prosto to učvršćuje nekako u njihovom umu da je to najznačajnija stvar da poznaju Isusa.
Yeah, so it's fun to see.
Tako da je to jako interesantno vidjeti.
During COVID we first started doing something like that.
I to smo počeli u toku COVID-a da radimo i jako je ispao dobro.
And Sammy was about this tall.
Samuel bio tako toliko visok.
And he'd stand behind a little chair.
I on bi stojao
like it was his pulpit.
Stao bi na stolicu kao da je to njegov
And he'd read from the Word of God.
I čitao bi Svetog pisma.
And he'd share something that would be important.
Podelio nešto što je bilo bitno njemu.
I don't know how old he was, maybe 9 or 10 or something.
Imao je možda 10 godina.
But the kids all got the idea that the Word of God is important.
Ali prosto bi dobili jasnu poruku da je to reč Božja značajna. Yeah, great example. Thank you. What other example you have few?
Monte shared that we should not provoke our children to anger, and I can share a couple of examples how it happens
Monte
a
je
lot.
spomenuo da ne treba da provociramo bes u našoj deci.
For example, in our family, we're not perfect parents. I want you to understand.
Odmah želim da kažem, nismo savršeni roditelji.
So it happened a few times like that.
Yeah, maybe you should have our children come in for an interview sometime.
Da, možda bi bilo dobro da intervjuiš i njihovu decu, da čujem kako ovo stvarno funkcioniš.
So here's an example how we can provoke them to anger or make their spirit go down.
Kako prosto možemo da ih obeshrabrimo, da njihov duh ode dole.
For example, when we lived together, all 10 of us in Russia,
dok smo zajedno živjeli svih nas 10 u Rusiji,
6 or all 8 children had chores at home.
Chores.
Хозяйственные дела по дому.
Aha, znači 6 do 8 dece je imalo domaće dužnosti u kući.
So each one had 4, and let's say 6 people are doing it. 6 children.
Znači 6 je imalo. Okay.
So there are 24 things that every day get done.
Znači, bilo je podeljena su dužnosti u kući i to je 20 nešto dužnosti koje su bile podeljene među decom i njima.
But as you understand, we are not perfect.
Pošto nismo savršeni.
Some days not all the things were done.
Nekad bi se desilo da se ne urade sve te dužnosti koje su kao iznošenje smeća i tako.
So we come home from a seminar, let's say.
Došli bi sa predavanja.
I walk into the house,
ušao bi u kuću,
and in our little doorway there are shoes that are all over from 10 people.
Svugdje bi razbacane obuće od 10.
And there's no place to put your foot there.
I prosto nisi mogu da staviš nigdje nogu. Yeah, my life loss.
And you try to think, like, whose chore is that?
I razmišljam, čija je to dužnost, ko nije uradio?
You don't remember because you're not happy.
Moja žena to jako voli.
So you can...
I prosto nisi sretan tog momenta pa i zaboraviš da su dužnosti menjale.
So you just say, kids, calm down, and they all come down from the second floor down.
Deco, dolazite vamo, svi dolaze da vide šta je.
So that happened a couple of times when all of them are kind of standing in line.
U liniji stoji ispred nje, postrojene.
And we say, whoever chore that was, you didn't do it.
Ko da je to uradio, ti to nisi uradio.
And that's a wrong way to do it, because maybe 22 or 23 things were done.
To je pogrešan način, možda je 22, 23 stvari bilo urađeno.
But we looked at one that was not.
Ali mi smo birali to jedno koje nije bilo urađeno.
And if all we do is criticize them together for not doing the best they could.
Da. I mi bi tamo stojali i kritikovali sve za to što nije urađeno.
Those who did their things, their spirits can go down that mom and dad are not happy.
Da, i prosto oni koji su uradili njihov zadatak, njihov duh bi otišao dole, osjećali bi se obeshrabljeni, mama i tata nisu sretni, a oni su uradili sve što su trebali da urade.
I think as parents we tend to see things that children did not do.
Prosto mi kao roditelji imamo tendenciju da vidimo ono što naša deca ne urade.
And when we do not...
Culture here, absolutely, kažem naša kultura potpuno.
And when we don't notice and value the things that they do, they get discouraged.
I kada mi to ne primetimo šta su uradili, onda oni stvarno budu obeshrabreni.
And what's interesting actually is our desire is that they do even better. That's our sincere desire.
Naša želja je iskrena da oni budu bolji u tome što rade.
But the result is the opposite.
Znači kad ih kritikujemo, ali zapravo rezultat je potpuno obrnuti, da se oni obeshrabre.
Why even try? Mom and dad won't be happy.
Zašto se uopšte truditi kad oni nikad neće biti zadovoljni sa mnom? I understand.
So a good example, we try not to criticize.
Da, prosto odlučili smo da ih ne kritikujemo.
We try.
I understand, yes. Razumem potpuno.
But the good way would be
dobar pristup bi bio
to step over those shoes,
pregaziti preko te obuće,
not say anything,
ništa ne reći,
and go into the house and look at the things that they actually did.
I pogledati prosto stvari šta su to deca uradila od njihovih tih domaćih zadataka, kućnih poslova.
And for example, look in the kitchen and the stove when I was cooking was really dirty and I rushed away.
Znači kuvala sam pre odlaska i ostavio sam špored jako uprlja.
But one of the children whose chore that was actually cleaned it.
Dete čiji zadatak to bio i očistio sve to.
So the best thing would be not just to think, oh, he did a good job, and actually say it to him.
I ne treba samo da kažem, uradio je dobar posao, nego stvarno trebamo i reći to detetu, yes.
So I noticed when I say it in front of everyone,
znam kada to kažem ispred svih, znala sam kada to kažem ispred svih.
They get encouraged, they want to do more.
Onda žele da urade više. da je budu ohrabreni.
And I can say simply, well, I'm so sorry, in the morning I was in a hurry and made everything dirty, but you did such a wonderful thing cleaning it.
Da, mogu da kažem, ostavio sam sve o haosu, a vi ste odradili tako dobar posao sklanjajući.
And you can see a child walk like this. Yeah, I did it.
Kaže,
and he appreciates that we noticed it.
Da, i prosto ceni što smo mi primetili. Yes.
And he'll want to do more next time.
I prosto sledeći put će biti spreman da više uradi od toga.
And then another child can say, and I took the trash out.
I onda znači drugo dete može kaže, ali ja sam iznao smeće napolje. Da,
and we understand he would like to hear encouragement.
I prosto i ono hoće da čuje ohrabrenje.
And it all connects back to the planning idea too.
I to sve se nekako povezuje sa tom idejom planiranja.
Because one of the things we wanted in our children
jer mi prosto želimo neke stvari da se desi u našoj deci.
We wanted them to be responsible.
Želimo da budu odgovorni.
So some of the times when they had these chores or these things they had to do at the house.
A dok imaju te listu dužnosti za kuću.
Sometimes it would have been easier for us to do it.
Nekada bi prosto bilo lakše da mi to uradimo.
But we wanted to teach the kids responsibility.
Ali prosto želimo da naučimo našu decu odgovornosti.
So when we're thinking about, okay, we want this, how do we get there?
Ako razmišljamo o tome, hoćemo da dođemo do ovde, kako da dođemo do toga.
We think, okay, we could develop chores that would actually help us and would help them develop these qualities.
Prosto razmišljam koje su to onda obaveze kućne koje mogu nama da pomognu, a da njima pomognu u razvoju.
So I think it always helps coming back to like what do we want the result to be.
I to se uvijek vraća tome kako da, koje to rezultate mi hoćemo da imamo, kako da planiramo. Interesting. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Ovo je bila Teologija za jutarnju kafu, danas smo pričali o roditeljstvu. Pratite nas, gledajte nas, bilo mi je radost da ste sa nama, da ste nešto naučili, vidimo se.